Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your teacher, mentor, midwife, and host of this amazing podcast. Together, we're going to navigate our interior lives. We're going to unearth our own personal truth, our insights, and our inner knowing. Change what you see in the world, how you make decisions, and the way you lead yourself and others. Welcome back to the Turning Inward podcast. And today we're having a heart-to-heart conversation. So on the line with me is Nancy and Char. And we bantered for a tiny bit before the recording started. But what's popping up for us is meaning and perspective and story. And I don't know why I just got nervous in that moment. That is so weird. I'm just going to acknowledge that a tiny bit of anxiety. Or maybe I'm going to reframe it as excitement. I'm excited to be talking to you ladies. I'm excited to be back in your ear if you're listening to us while you're running, walking the dog, or just on the way to work, on a commute to wherever, because we have lots of commutes nowadays. So, perspective. Today, this is how we got going on this. The weather in Texas today is almost 60 degrees, so it is full sun. I was celebrating by being outside until we got interrupted with noise. So I came back inside, and then Nancy mentioned that would be a slightly different thing in Minnesota.
Yes, it would.
We all look at things a little bit differently, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we should try to get each other to look at things the same way, or just sort of recognize that we have different experiences that give us different perspectives? That's kind of like cone, don't you think?
Ooh, yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah, I think I can get into a lot of trouble trying to get somebody to look at something from my point of view. It's like, if they decide to, great. But if they'd rather not, then that's their business.
And we want to stay out of other people's business and stay in our own business. But how do we do that when we're interconnected? I mean, is the idea of staying in our own business actually possible when we are so interconnected?
I think yes.
Yes.
I think it can be challenging for sure. But I also think that with practice and intention, we can be successful, 90% of the time, if not more.
So an example of maybe staying in my own business would be...
You're going to give an example now, right?
Well, I can't think of one, so if you have one off the top of your head, go for it.
No, couldn't tell whether you were asking me or you were preparing to make a statement about your own example.
So that, what you just did right there, was beautiful. Because no, this is serious.
I know.
It's very serious shot. The way you verbalize that. Well, it might be natural in the beginning. Maybe we experience our way out of it, but then we have to relearn that. To be able to verbalize your experience in the moment without putting a story on it. Was that an example of being in your own business?
Yes, because I had a question, right? I had a big question mark over my head. And it was getting awkward because we were both talking at the same time, right? So I didn't want that to happen. So I had to go back and say, okay, I'm the one with the question. I'll say what it is.
I like that.
Yeah, and you stayed in your business because you weren't like telling her, like, Vivian, you need to, like you didn't project the problem onto her. You were like, where's my lack of clarity here? And express that.
Projection is such a funny thing. My husband loves to use that word now. I told him he didn't go to coach training, so he can't. But he'll ask me just directly, are you projecting right now? And I'm like, oh my gosh. I roll.
Well, and recently I was reading a little and they were talking about transference. And I was like, well, wait a minute. What's the difference between projection and transference? Like, I still don't know that I know.
What is transference?
Well, I'll have to look it up again. But they're both ways of putting what you're experiencing onto somebody else. And the difference was not clear to me, which is why I asked. This is when we need a call-in show. Let's open the lines and have our psychologist friend call in who studied
and explain the difference.
I would be willing to go out on a limb and possibly oversimplify and say transference is what happens in a therapeutic relationship. So the transference is something that gets transferred to the therapist or the patient-therapist relationship from another relationship.
Yeah, it says here, transference is a theoretical phenomenon characterized by unconscious redirection of the feelings a person has about a second person to feelings the first person has about a third person. So I guess, that would happen a lot in a therapeutic relationship. You transfer your feelings about, I don't know, your mother onto the therapist or something like that. I mean, I'm sure we do this in all kinds of relationships, but
Sure do.
That would be a hotbed for that, I imagine.
And projection is fill in the blank.
It's more like you see the world as you are rather than seeing the world as it is.
I had a recent conversation where I think the metaphor that she used applies. She said the difference is looking out a window versus looking in a mirror. No?
Well, the definition, I'm just Debbie Dictionary today. Psychological.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That role.
Is a defense mechanism in which the human ego defends itself against unconscious impulses or qualities by denying their existence in themselves while attributing them to others. For example, a person who is habitually rude may constantly accuse others of being rude. So it's a sort of like the mirror only going the other way, like not seeing it in yourself, but then, oh, I'm good at that one. I got to raise my hand. I'm getting better at it. But yeah. So seeing qualities.
I know you are, but what am I?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so good.
Oh my God.
Man. Well, thank you for the dictionary definitions because I never go back to them, and that's perfect.
I really find myself doing that a lot lately. Like, I've always kind of liked looking up word origins, but it's sort of like, what does that mean? Like, where does that come from? So I like getting an etymological, however you say that, perspective on things. But I never actually look up the dictionary definitions for a lot of things. And for some reason lately, I've really just been doing that. I think it was 2 conversations or so ago, we were all talking a little bit about language and commonality, and also kind of talking about sort of when we speak with others or when we're communicating, we may be using the same word and holding different definitions of something, and how we don't even realize that's happening sometimes, and just how even in common language, I think kind of winding it back to the opening too, Vivi, is sort of that, like even our perspective on language, like things that help us supposed to see and understand where each other's coming from or express ourselves can be, even that in itself can be a little challenging.
Yeah. So my dissertation boils down like 260 pages or maybe it was 180, who knows? It doesn't matter. Boiled down to 4 words. Talk is the work. Like the idea was, what does it take for people to work together better? Interorganizational collaboration and across everything. Like for years and years, it always boiled down to engaging in conversation and getting to not just the same meaning, but sometimes even a third meaning. What do our 2 exchanges mean to each other? It's a lot of work. I feel like it's a lot of what I do. The effort that I expend when I'm having a conversation, like trying to express an idea, coming to an agreement. I'm going to say something kind of crazy. Tell me what you guys think about it. If we rely on language less, I think this is something that I didn't think about then when I was studying it. If we relied less on the words that we're saying or that we're hearing, and we allowed a bigger picture to present itself to us, body language, body sensations, just the whole sensing of who we are, even us with each other. We can't see each other, and we're not in the same geographic, area. But I would gather to say that we are listening to more than just the words that we're saying to each other. And that makes this communication, this language, this conveying of a meaning maybe easier. And we can intentionally do that deeper analysis. What do y'all think about that?
Well, my attention goes straight to the word intention. In a conversation, the actual exchange of information, verbal and nonverbal, is partly conscious and partly unconscious, because that's kind of pretty much always the way we're operating. Yes? So what my intention is can influence both my conscious and unconscious energy, because we're always, I think, sorting through what's on the surface and what's underneath. And some of us more so than others, because we're just made that way. I'm made that way, to look deeply. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to start there with my part of the conversation. My first response to the question.
Yeah, well, a couple things come to mind for me to piggyback on what you're saying, Char, too, is, I don't think we are always aware of what our exactly what you're saying. Like, we're not always aware of what our underlying intentions or needs are in communicating or listening or being listened to until it's pretty clear they're not being met. But what I really find fascinating lately, and I spend a tiny bit of time thinking about this, is what you're saying too, Vivi, is, language developed last, verbal communication in our evolution, from what I understand. And so, and I think of, all of us do intuitive work. And I think of how when you're in intuitive development, you realize how many different ways there are to listen and receive information and be connected, which is, exactly what you're saying, Vivi, like, listening and communicating and being really deeply present, that sort of, you bring all of your sensory organ, all of your senses alive into, I imagine, would be a much different kind of conversation. And I also think about, there's a huge reliance on verbal communication, but there are a lot of people who live in the world who cannot communicate or choose, or for personal choice or whatever, don't use words. And so it isn't the only way to communicate and understand each other. And there's almost like, I think, a taking for granted of it that happens a little bit, like, I'll speak for myself, like sometimes words just come out of my mouth so fast and easy that I'm not even paying attention sometimes really to what I'm saying or want to communicate.
I'm going to raise my hand to that. That happens so much to me.
Me too. And then, just as you said, Nancy, I don't realize that what I'm saying is not being understood, or not being understood in the way I meant it, until I see the reaction in the person that I'm communicating with. And then's my opportunity to, realign again and try again.
And that is what I saw and pointed out in you earlier, Char. So I just adore each of you, and I love our conversations. But like, when you said the intention, Nancy, the greater intention for me is, I'm recognizing it. I didn't realize what it was before, but now I'm recognizing it. I think I just started to recognize it in the last conversation. So unfolding for me happens within the experience. And I've become more okay with that as I've gotten more gray hair. So I've recognized that my greater intention with us having a public conversation is that it serves as a tool for connection and as a resource for like avenues and ideas and, you know, what is this intuitive thing? Why don't I just go with my point of view? Like all these greater questions can come, you know, if someone or when someone's listening and open to the topics we talk about. And the other thing is that the thing that I think is the most beautiful and is that we allow the experience to unfold in the moment. We don't practice these things. We don't have an outline that we talk about. You know, it's an in the moment experience. It's presence in sort of action, I guess. We are with each other now in conversation. And I think modeling how to have a conversation or be in conversation or listening to our conversation is an important skill, you know? So I just wanted to verbalize that out loud. Again, not trying to be more careful about the words as they came out, but also knowing that I am nowhere near, you know, like those thoughts aren't fully developed, but it's okay to get them out and to share them.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to each of you, and as we have these heart-to-heart conversations, you know, for a podcast that serves the expanding of our inner life, the exploration of that, you know, ourselves and understanding ourselves, what would you say is your own intention when we gather together? Just verbalizing that for our listeners.
I would say my main intention is to share my experience. I've learned so much about my inner life and seeing myself and my unconscious more clearly, you know, the shadow more clearly, and accepting myself more. I like to just like have people see me be that way and hope that that gives them permission to be that way. And when they're looking for how to overcome whatever obstacles they come up against, that, you know, somewhere in there is an example of, you know, the many ways, the many strategies and thoughts and perspectives that they can bring to that obstacle.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I don't think I ever really asked myself. It's like, it's fun. I love talking to you guys. But there is more to it than that because I come with a certain respect and reverence and perspective.
Thank you, Char.
Yeah, and for me, you know, I think I appreciate you asking the question too, because there's always the reason we show up for something, right? Even if you don't know what it is. And I think what I appreciate about connecting in this conversation in this way are two things. One is that having the space to share my own thoughts without having to edit in concert with the two of you helps me understand more about what I think or illuminates more questions for me. So some people say, like, I write to know what I think, or I write, you know, to understand my thoughts. And I think this is an arena for me where I understand myself or see myself more clearly. And I think the second part of it is just practicing speaking unedited in front of an imagined audience in some way. It's not present in my mind, but it is in the back of my mind. Yeah. So my intention in some way is to just allow myself to speak and be heard without, in a relatively safe environment and space where I don't have to worry about being criticized for it or about it or what I'm saying or thinking.
I love that. I think both of you mirrored layers of my own intention. And when you said concert, that
I knew
resonated.
You'd like that one.
You did.
I chose that word for you. I really did.
Did you? I
totally.
do like it.
I feel like you handed it to me. I felt you hand me that one.
Wow. So that brings up emotion in me. And
I'm just smiling at the two of you. Sorry to interrupt.
It's not an interruption. We're intuitiving each other. I was just enjoying the engagement and just recognizing how much I do adore that word and the connotations and, the other words that are in its same family. Relationship and harmony and together and community and just those sorts of things literally light me up from the inside. And it's nice to experience it in a safe, loving, y'all didn't use the word loving, but I'm using it. This is a loving, sacred sort of circle.
It's a word and thought concert.
Word and thought concert. That's what it is. We're like our own little jazz band.
Yeah, it is.
I love it. So I'm going to take us in a totally different direction now. I heard this, and I'm not exactly sure what the words were, but it was something about the stories of our life sort of give it meaning, but we should edit them often. What is your initial responses, reactions to that? And have you heard something along those lines?
I have not heard anything along those lines expressed that way. I think it's a very excellent perspective because I've been in a transition for a while, and that does require me to examine my stories that I'm carrying with me from the past and decide whether they're still working for me and make new ones. And I find that I'm changing more rapidly now. And so I need to be more adept at coming up with useful stories after I've deconstructed the ones that, are no longer serving me, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah. Although I have not thought of it really as stories so much, I've been focusing more on, routines, but more like routines of, thought and centering and inquiry and questioning and that kind of stuff. But that is story in a way.
I don't think I've heard that said exactly that way either. And similar to Char, my initial reaction is kind of like, oh yeah, like good. I like that because I think we live our lives, whether we realize it or not, through our identity and through our story. It shapes a lot of our action, and who we think we are dictates how we show up in the world or what we decide to do. And I think a lot of that isn't always conscious, but, sometimes it is. It's good to pay attention to that. And I think, in coaching and in intuitive circles, we do bring a little bit more of that into our present awareness, or at least try to some of the time. And then I noticed I had a real hesitation to it because I thought about my own writing style where I edit too much while I'm writing, and then I get frustrated and I don't know the bigger, larger story. So to me, there's also an element of making sure there's space to not be making so much meaning or editing your story so much like while you're in it that you're missing out on larger expressions or larger views or larger unfoldings or bigger themes. So it feels like a little bit of like a both and there to me in some ways.
So much both and.
It's hard to see the story when you're in the middle of living it. I think it's a device that's used for perspective taking. And you can't be perspective taking all the time. Sometimes you're just collecting information or learning or whatever. And you might not be able to tell the story while you're doing that because you're in the middle of it.
This goes back to, I would say, my kindergarten days of recognizing points of view and perspective, which wasn't that long ago. I'd say less than half a dozen years. Right? I'm like, you guys, I'm not that grown up. When I recognized, like, I had this, not just an understanding, but an actual, I feel like an embodied experience. Like, I grew up, I have 3 sisters and a brother. And us being in some conversation, remembering some event, and me being fascinated that at the exact same moment, we had different stories about what happened at that moment. I was sitting there like, wow, none of us is wrong. None of us is telling an untruth. Each of us is telling our own truth. The facts were all the same, but the stories, the meaning and the experience that came from each one of us was so different. it literally fascinated me, like confused me at the same time. And that's when I began to understand maybe what you alluded to earlier, Char. When I try to get someone else to have my perspective, and I get stuck in that, trying to change their experience in a way. So, and how it just happens was fascinating to me. And maybe this is helpful in that way. That's like, oh, because it's not the facts that persuade us, right? It's the experience and the meaning and the bigger things that lead us somewhere. The emotions that we have about something. And the background, I guess. Because back then I was like, how can we have different perspectives and different stories of the exact same experience? It was so baffling.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I want to recognize that you guys did, you both were thankful for the question. Again, reflecting back on my own, I remember when that might have been defensive to me. Like, what are you doing asking me a question? What do you mean? Like the openness that you have in the inquiry. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So that makes me curious, Viv.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would have felt defensive about that to you? I mean, in this context, to me, there's like, or maybe many of them, hey, ask me what I think. Gee, take a seat, I'll tell you, but
I'm with you there, Nancy.
in a right? Like, as long as it's really coming from a genuine place, like,
Mm-hmm.
and it appears the person is asking out of interest. But that makes me curious about if you're experiencing some kind of defense in that makes me really curious if you know what was going on, or only in certain contexts, or...
No, I appreciate you asking about it, because the language, I actually have a voice, and I'm not going to say what voice I'm hearing, but it was like, what were you thinking? Like that connotating, what were you thinking? Like, what was the idea behind this? Totally, what is the condescending and, disrespectful. So it was not in a space like this at all. And I guess that was the contrast I was making between you guys being open and grateful for the, invitation for inquiry, and my response to that question. But again, it was presented so differently. So then at that time, I was defensive. I was like, well, was I thinking? Questioning myself rather than exploring, or rather than accepting it as an invitation to look deeply and say something else. And that brings us back to the context, right? The bigger picture. What's the bigger story? What's the intention behind it? That's when I was defensive, Nancy. And I guess also because of my own judgment about me always thinking, always wanting to know why I'm doing something. And when that question is posed to me in that way, it's as if I haven't given it any intentional thought. And I like to think of myself, right? My identity is that I'm more conscientious, and that I'm more considerate than that, whatever that is.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think I'm like watching my own growth.
Yeah. And the thing I keep coming back to is how much self-compassion and self-love we need to continue this growth process, because as we become more aware of how well we live up to our lofty ideals, you can make the meaning be, I'm no good, or, I'm disappointing myself or others. Or you can make the meaning be, oh, look, I used to not be able to do this, and now I can. And now I can see, oh, I could maybe do that too. It's perspective is everything when you're trying to do something complex and difficult, because you can't make a long journey without changing your perspective a million times. It's literally what happens, if that makes sense.
You've got to rest in between, right? Because it is a long journey.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't recognize this until just now, but within university, we have quarterly experiences. The next experience is telling a better story. And I was stuck on the end. And Char, you do this. This is also to let you guys know in on my creative process. So I don't know by default. Char, you have had a hand in pretty much every quarterly experience because of this, mirroring that happens. I think somehow beautifully between you and I. And in this specific experience, I didn't know how to close it, because the question that I was answering is, how do I keep going? You know, how do I not lose motivation? And you answered that, because it's such a long journey that you have to build in rest stops. And I think it was you, Nancy, if it was you or Char that's talked about self-compassion, but I feel like that's the missing piece for me in this journey that I was developing, is that building in the rest stops and remembering to have self-reflection as you look back. Because it is a continuous journey. We are never, you know, that famous phrase that I love so much is, we're not like dinner, we're not done, we're like laundry. Just keeps coming. So thank you for that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It's like you finished my homework for me.
I love that. I don't even know I'm doing it.
Oh, interesting.
Which is a great lesson for, you know, friends and cheerleaders and coaches everywhere. You know, it's like, you just show up and do the best you can. And, you know, the person who's in that conversation with you will get what they need out of it. And you don't know how. That's
a topic, pregnant, right? Like, you want to go there, Nancy? Whoa.
That is a juicy worm. Yeah. I just want to note that I think that's maybe one of those soft skills, if you needed a resume, Char, that you answer people's questions without them needing to ask you. That could just be a transferable skill you have by the way you show up and listen and share your experience, not just as a byproduct, but part of your gift.
Amen.
I love that.
Because you notice she didn't say it was me doing it. No, I'm just teasing.
Oh,
and I say that so jokingly, lovingly, because I was not doing any comparing or despairing. I was really admiring the way you could point that out, Vivi, but
And I immediately was like, but no, your level of awareness is different, Nancy.
Oh, I know. I really wasn't saying that. So here it brings up one other thing that I think is really beautiful in conversation that's really open and loving and reflective is I think we do get to see each other and we get to see ourselves more clearly in it when we're reflecting back. You said that we thanked you for the question. You thanked Char for the answer. It's sort of that same kind of openness that somebody may have something to offer you. And I know that that's an area of my little inner rebel is like, I want to do it all myself. It's like, I want to know all my, don't, and it's not, and certainly in all kinds of situations and conversations, I'm not actively doing that. But there are some times when I notice I really also kind of shut down to wanting to hear what people have to say, or when the way people are saying things is sort of that projection thing, or that, where like, well, I have your answers, this is what and so none of that is showing up in that way here. Because I think we all kind of want to feel like, and this goes back to the coaching, it's like we want to be guided to our own answers in a way where like we get to be the genius at the same time. It's like supported and helped and fueled by others, because it always is. And yet there's something about certain energies and conversations where the gold just gets mined and nobody's like the holder of it, the holder of the knowledge, the one bestowing it, or the, so I think part of what's important here too is just like a real sense of safety and belonging, but also a sense of equanimity that we're all learning. We all have things to offer. We can listen and hear and receive. And that is hard for me in certain environments or with certain people. Some people, I just don't want to hear what you have to say. That's not always a horrible thing, really. But it is something I'm aware of, like who I'm willing to let teach me, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, going back to, the etymology and the origin of words and our earlier conversation about the intention of things, what you shared just brought up for me. I learned the origin of education, educar, or, the Latin. It is to draw out from within what you already know.
Love that.
Right?
You can't say that enough. Like, that should be everywhere.
Yes.
And I cut you off. So,
no, that was a complete sentence. I just felt myself open when I understood, because we were talking about identities, and I have this issue. I call myself a teacher, but I have an issue with presenting myself as someone who knows better, knows more, right? Because you're your own best teacher. But I still use the term teacher. And what helped me to sort of be okay with the term teacher is a new perspective and understanding of what it was like in this, like within university. Who am I to call myself a teacher? But when I look at education in that way, when I hold education in that, with that intention, when I frame experiences that serve in this way, it is to draw out from within what you already know. And if it resonates, it's because it connects in some way. I want to provoke you a tiny bit, though. And this is Nancy. When you say that you recognize that there are people you don't want to learn from, is it there? And I'm not knowing the details, and you don't have to share more than you feel comfortable, obviously. When I reflect back on like a person that I don't want to learn from, not that person, but if I explore the reaction I'm having, then I don't always accept like that person, but immediately, but I'm like, oh, I see where I could grow from this. But I have to let go of wanting that other person to grow in order to do that, or to change in any way. Is that what you meant, or was it different?
Well, I think that definitely happens sometimes, for sure. Yeah. And I think in the example that I was thinking of is even among people I really love and care for and respect and admire, that there are sometimes ways that people will say things to me sort of directly or matter-of-factly, oh, well, that's because you're like this, or that's because, whatever, that as soon as somebody sort of like, not always, but is sort of in that position of like telling me who I am, then I'm like, oh no, no, I'm not who you say I am. It's that kind of a thing. Like, so they may be absolutely right, but I just get a little rebellious and rejecting in the moment because for whatever reason, I don't want them to be right about me, or I don't want them to know and tell me, or, just like a little. And I think in some ways, probably likely that they're illuminating or pointing something out that is either sensitive or touchy to me in the first place, or is ahead of where I am. It's almost like they're pointing out something about myself that I hadn't gotten to yet. And I sort of feel like it's almost being, oh, you took away my opportunity for me to find that out for myself, kind of, I think, are the couple of things that come up when that happens. Like, you gave me my, I think self-discovery is a pretty fun game sometimes. And I think there are certain times when somebody gives you the answer and you're like, but I wanted to find that out. And I don't even realize it till it's happening,
Is self-discovery fun?
Well,
yes. Is it easy? No. Painless?
Yeah.
No.
Looks like your trek to see the gorillas wasn't all fun, Char, but it was certainly worth it, right?
Exactly.
I haven't heard this story. Tell this story.
Oh, gosh. I went way outside my comfort zone. It's fine. I'm happy to tell it. It's a cool story. I went way outside my comfort zone and went with a couple of friends and a fantastic guide to Uganda to visit or for a gorilla trek. So you go up in the windy, it was impenetrable rainforest and look for the gorillas and spend an hour with them and then return to where you came from, which could take anywhere, hiking in very high altitudes of rainforest in a group with someone who will carry your pack for you. Just saying.
Nice way to travel.
Well, it was still very difficult for me. So I was telling Nancy that when we went, we did it 2 days in a row. So the first day, by the time we reached probably 50 feet from the place where we began, I literally just sat down and wept. I was just so done. I was so tired and so, had been outside my comfort zone for, too many hours. I'd probably had low blood sugar for all we know. I probably hadn't eaten or anything. And then we had to go back the next day. And so I wept before we went. And, my friends in the guide are saying, but I'm like, I don't think I could do this. And they're like, but you have to. And I'm like, no, I don't think I could. They're like, but you have to. So I did. It was absolutely amazing. But I finally reached the end of my comfort zone. I don't think I'd ever actually really been there before. And, it was awe-inspiring and a little humbling. But the second day, the gorilla troop that we saw, it was totally worth it because they had babies and youngsters, and we saw them just grooming each other and playing together. It was a very cool sighting. And as they were down in a ravine, that was all vines and stuff. So we weren't actually even really standing on the ground, we were just standing on piles of vines, and which completely freaked me out. But our guide, Abiaz, just kept saying to me as we were going down, 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 down into this valley, and I'm looking back and I'm thinking I have to climb out of here. No. And he's saying, just don't think about it. So I did. I didn't think about it. I had a lovely hour where I, communed with our, very close cousins. Right? And felt that peace of beings that are just being and perfectly fine with it, and dealt with the climb out later. I needed help at the end. They literally, Abiaz and one of the rangers literally had to carry me with my feet dangling, holding each one of me under one arm and my feet dangling the last 20 feet of very steep hill. It was mortifying. And I was incredibly grateful.
Exactly. I was going to say.
And then everybody we met when we went to other places touring, Ugandans you'd say oh, we just came from seeing the gorillas. They'd look at me and say, oh, you are very strong. People really do go and they get halfway there and they're like, oh no, I can't do this, and turn back. It happens.
Kind of like self-discovery journeys.
Exactly.
We got somewhere. Awesome.
That's a real life experience of self-discovery, because when we are in this mode of self-discovery, of, examination, we're on the edge of our comfort zone the entire time. It's chaotic. It's full of opportunity and potential, but it's scary. And you can't think about it. You can't. You got to experience your way into it like you did. Wow.
I love that story. I'm just so in awe of your bravery and determination and how you showed up for yourself in that to get to enjoy it. And, you didn't say when you told me the story before about being carried at the end. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got chills when you said that, because I think that's another really big parallel about, self-discovery journey being fun, ? Is our willingness to let someone carry us. And that reminds me a little bit about my hesitation about, you don't have my answers, sort of surrendering to the help and support that's available. And, how important and vital that is at times because it's an illusion, that we're doing it ourselves anyway. you know?
Yeah, good point.
That point, Nancy, surrendering to help and support. I sense, now it's been verbalized a couple of times, but I sense that that has to happen. You know, there's this, so and I'm talking about before someone comes to a coaching relationship. I've figured this all out myself. I've done it all on my own. But there has to be a surrender. And there very often is, you know. And then to say, I need support. I am surrendering to help. Because, again, there is an illusion that we do it on our own. And to be carried. I think when we do surrender, we are carried. Like, you are physically carried, but I feel that flow, that sort of ease in forward movement when I surrender to help. Like, even just recognizing that you were giving me answers to the questions I was asking myself earlier. That was a surrendering because I wanted to figure it out myself. I guess I'm just verbally recognizing the process. I feel like it's a little bit of word.
But there is a cultural thing, right? So like it's cheating if you like just ask for the answers. You're supposed to be able to figure everything out yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or memorize it all, which, you know, you get to a point where the things that you're doing are so complicated.
All of us like life.
Yeah.
My goodness. What a beautiful conversation. I think I asked you guys this once before, and I loved the way that it framed our closing ritual. I'm going to ask it again in this way. So if you had sort of final words of inspiration or motivation for travelers on the self-discovery journey who are feeling tired and haven't surrendered, what would you, each of you, say to them to help them keep going or maintain their motivation?
You have one, Nancy? You want to go first?
Okay, yeah, I'll shoot from the hip here. Oh, I'm trying not to use words like shoot and violent language. So my initial response is a question in a way. Like, well, the first is sort of an instruction, which is if you're having trouble, continuing, rest. Because I think, pushing ourselves past our limits isn't healthy. What I'm discovering for myself is just, we're so action oriented. Do. And I think for myself, what I'm learning is it often takes a lot longer than I realize to really integrate information from my action, from my learning. And so, I think rest and slow down is always a great idea. And then I think in those moments, it's sort of like a great time to center yourself and notice like just where you are, like come into presence. Because I think when we get tired or we forget where we're going or we don't know why we're doing something, we're just not present. We're in the future, we're in the past, we're on shoulds, we're on, it's like we've lost touch with ourselves. And so I think it's just a real invitation to practice coming home, like really home to yourself again before needing to move on to that next thing. And I would say that this is a fundamental part of staying the course, so to speak. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me. Curious what you'll have to share.
I completely agree with everything that you said and might have said it myself as well. But I'm going to springboard off of what you said to like, okay, you've tried all of that and you're still having a struggle. And because I've been in this space very recently. And if you're trying everything you possibly can try and it's still not working, try something different again. Just if, it's like, just switch. If you're working really hard and it's not working, rest. If you've just been resting and you still don't feel like, you know what to do, just do something. And like, let the momentum change when you start to feel stuck, because the reason you feel stuck is that's what needs to happen. There isn't any wrong way to do that, because the only thing that will keep you from progressing is insisting that you know how to do it and doing it that way, even though it's not working. Anything else is 100% right, even though you don't know it yet.
So much wisdom. I have such wise friends.
And I just want to say that you have a genius for helping us share it and pulling it out of us. So thank you.
If something needs to change and you don't quite know what it is yet, tune in and turn inward. I host an online learning community where we can figure it out together. It feels like a little family, and it's a place where you can be supported and offer support, because togetherness sparks change. Visit my digital home at viviancarrasco.com to learn more.